this, and I'll send it to you all. So the two things that memoir, if you ask agents, you ask editors, publishers, what makes for a good memoir, a lot of them will tell you it comes down to two things, that's telling good stories and having a strong voice. And, a good story, that's something we'll talk a lot about over the passing week. You can look up what makes a good story, and there's various structures. And I will actually present some of these structures to you. In my experience, a good story is something that you feel your way toward. You start out in one place and you feel your way, and I really mean feel, toward a crisis and a climax, and then you get to the other side, the resolution. And so, a good story is sort of like a cargo boat. It says more than you even think it says. There's a real magic to a good story. And I almost use that word magic in the wildest sense. I mean, if you send somebody a spreadsheet of all the details of your life, or you write a story about it, or even a story about part of your life, I really believe, and I think you would find this true, that if you told a story, the reader would find out so much more about who you are. And even if the information presented is not any different from what you gave in the spreadsheet, they're magical things that carry information and carry feelings and carry depth of character, maybe even soul, if you like that word. So I encourage you to think, and I was thinking as you were talking, Chris, about that feeling that you've got so much to say, and sort of like, do I tell the long version or do I tell the short version? And what I would actually say to you would be to trust telling stories. And of course, I'm going to go into more detail and show you ways to pivot on those stories and present the thinking and the feeling stuff you want to give to the readers. But if you really focused on telling stories, there's a sort of self-organizing kind of way that will cut away that which doesn't belong, and it will bring in that which belongs. And so if you trust the organizational power of a story and multiple stories, and simply, a memoir is little more than a garland, a stringing together of really good stories. And of course, you want it to build, and there's lots of things you want it to do. You want to write good transitions between stories. But if you could, I often, with a lot of clients, have them just start out telling stories from different periods of their life and not even worrying about the structure. And so that's just a good way to build up material that you're going to use, and you're going to use it in story form. So that's a little bit about story, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. The second thing was voice, and voice is I think the natural way that people would think of voice would be the words you use, the kind of style of writing, but it's more than that. Voice is the lens or the worldview, the prism that you see the world through. It's sort of like, if you pass light through a prism, it divides it into the different colors, or I actually was thinking this morning of a better example, but it's almost like a coffee filter. It's a filter, you pour the water in, you've got the coffee in there, and if you've got really dark coffee or light coffee, or maybe it's tea this time, but it's gonna stain the water, this color, and make coffee or tea from it. And that's what voice is everything gets run through this filter, and it can consist of things like your work. If you're an architect, Chris, or I know, Robert, you were an engineer, or a body worker. So those kinds of things. If you're a spiritual person or you're not, you're a scientist, those things would sort of kind of color the worldview. When I was an editor at the magazine I worked for, we would often come up with story ideas to, like, let's send someone to the bottom of Patagonia with like no money and see if they could make their way back to the States. We just come up with some story idea, and that was the idea. But then we start talking, like, what kind of voice do we want? Do we want, a strong masculine voice, or a feminine voice, or something in between? Or is there kind of a really wild adventure-y voice we want? Do we want that person to find themselves in serious trouble, or do we want that to be kind of a softer journey? All those kinds of considerations would come up when we're trying to figure out which writer to assign it to. Do we want someone who's like really compassionate and finds, the meaning and joy in every difficult situation? Or do we want someone who's a curmudgeon, is gonna and so I invite you over the course of this course or this community to really play with your voice at first, but I think one way to find your voice is, again, to really just drop in to your most honest, casual way that you might talk to, maybe not quite an intimate, but a good friend that you're willing to share deep things about yourself, and at the same time, that you aren't just dumping on them. You kind of want to treat your reader like that, where you get intimate and honest and get real, and you maybe get down to the really the most truthful, honest things, but you're not going to come home from work and just complain. So there's some balance to that voice. So that's the main thing I wanted to talk about today, was just this distinction, this storytelling and the voice, and in action, I guess. And we'll go more deeper into that, but just know that that a lot of the clients and students I have, when they send me their first drafts, it tends to be way up here in the head. There's just a lot of they really feel necessary to tell me what they're thinking, and that's an essential part of a memoir. But I think of like writing for an audience a little bit. So I teach yoga as a on the side, and so when you teach yoga, you start out grounding the feet. And so I think I think the head, the ideas are actually the hardest place for us to connect with each other in a way. It's sort of like but we can connect easily with physical realities. That's what I meant about the feet. So if you can start your story and really ground it in physical reality, and then the next thing, when you teach a yoga pose, you might teach the the midsection area. And for me in writing, that's the heart area, and that's feeling states, and not just whimsical emotion, but deep feeling states, the things you value and care about. And so that sort of is the next thing I think about sharing with my readers. And the last thing is the head. And that's the thinking brain. And ideally, your story says way more than you think it does. And it, we do want that thinking brain material, but we also, we may need less of it than you think. That's the thinking brains, where we analyze, where we self-analyze, we analyze others, we draw lessons learned, and so those things can be quite valuable, and they may not end up taking as much space as you think. And so anyway, the big lesson here is, if that sounds like you, and you're leading with a lot of thinking, I would drop in and get down onto the mat and start really leading with physical reality and the heart material. The other thing I was going to say, it's a slightly different topic, but as I was thinking about that head material, what was I going to add to that? Oh, that also keep in mind that there's, there are lots of different kinds of memoir. I mean, there is the, the gut-wrenching story that is just all story. And on the other side, there's teaching memoirs, and there's straight nonfiction actually on the other far side. And there's everything in between, so one thing that a decision you'll want to make, or at least, keep it in mind, is what kind of memoir is it that you're working on? Is it a straight story, or is it one where you unpack the lessons learned a bit more and present them as maybe teachings? And if it's a teaching memoir, there's a way in which you might not even structure that book chronologically like a traditional memoir. Maybe it's held together by like one of my favorite kind of memoir-y nonfiction books is a book called the 5 Things You Cannot Change About Your Life. That's this approximate title, and lots of stories. The guy's a therapist, but he shares lots of stories about his practice and his life, and he's a Buddhist, and so but instead of starting it chronologically, but there's also a lot of memoir material in there. So just know that that's a decision you'll want to eventually make. Is it some memoirs are organized around something like like a gardener might organize their memoir around the different rows of the gardens and how the different vegetables brings up different. That's not a very good example, but I'll do that a lot. I'll kind of start down a road of examples that kind of fall apart on me, but ways you could, the 12 virtues, the 7 deadly sins, or whatever. You can find external.
The seasons, I think, is the gardener one.
What's that?
I said, I think the seasons is the garden one.
Seasons, there's a good one. Yeah, you're right. So anyway, I'll thank you for that, Chris, and I'll pause there. That's kind of my talk, and let's I'm going to unhit record here.